He woke to the smell of sterile air and the hum of machines he couldn't comprehend. And the first thing Brother Thomas saw was his own skull staring back at him from behind glass, jaw frozen in an eternal scream. The pain came second, not the pain of dying. That memory was already fading like a nightmare at dawn. But the pain of living again. Every nerve ending felt raw, exposed, as if his body had been turned inside out and reassembled by hands that didn't quite remember how a human was supposed to fit together. Thomas tried to move and discovered his wrists were bound, not with iron shackles like he expected, but with something smooth and unbreakable that glowed faintly in the darkness. He forced his eyes to focus. The room around him was wrong in ways his medieval mind struggled to process. The walls were too smooth, too white, lit by panels that blazed without flame or candle. And there, just 10 feet away, stood a tall case of crystal-clear material he had no name for. Inside it, mounted on a frame of gleaming metal, was a complete human skeleton dressed in the tattered remains of a white Templar surcoat. His surcoat, the red cross on the chest, was still visible, though centuries had turned it rust-brown. Thomas's breath caught. He knew those bones. He knew the way the left femur had healed crooked after a battle in Acre. He knew the chip in the third rib from a training accident when he was barely 16. He knew the skull because he'd touched his own face enough times to recognize its shape. "You are awake earlier than we expected," a voice said in flawless Latin, though the accent was strange, clinical. "Try not to struggle. The neural restraints will only tighten if you panic." A woman stepped into his field of vision. She wore clothing unlike anything Thomas had ever seen. A white coat that went to her knees, strange dark trousers, and her hair was cut shorter than any nuns he'd known. In her hands, she held a thin rectangle that glowed with shifting symbols and images. Her face was calm, analytical, as if waking a dead man from the 14th century was merely another task to complete before lunch. "Who are you?" Thomas's voice came out as a rasp, his throat feeling like he'd swallowed sand. "What sorcery is this?" "My name is Dr. Saracen. I'm a biotechnologist with the Resurrection Initiative. And this isn't sorcery, Brother Thomas. It's science. We've brought you back using genetic material recovered from your remains." She gestured toward the skeleton in the case. "Those bones have been in our museum for 83 years. They were discovered in 2142 beneath what used to be Paris, in a sealed chamber with 12 other Templars. All of you were executed on the same day, March 18th, 1314. Your bodies were hidden by sympathizers who believed you were innocent." The date struck him like a mace to the chest. March 18th. He remembered that day. He remembered King Philip's soldiers dragging them from their cells. He remembered the smell of the pyres being built in the square. He remembered Grand Master Jacques de Molay's voice ringing out across the crowd, proclaiming their innocence before God. He remembered the flames. "I died," Thomas whispered. "I burned. Yes, 711 years ago." Dr. Chen's expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry. I know this must be overwhelming." Overwhelming. Thomas would have laughed if his throat didn't feel like leather. "You've torn me from the arms of God or the fires of hell, I know not which, and placed me in a world I cannot fathom. You show me my own death like a trophy in a case, and you call it overwhelming." Dr. Chen tapped her glowing rectangle, and suddenly the wall beside them flickered to life with moving images. Thomas recoiled, his heart hammering, as he saw a bird's-eye view of a massive city unlike anything from his time. Towers of glass and steel stretched toward the heavens, higher than any cathedral. Strange metal carriages moved through the streets without horses. The sky itself seemed different, darker, with fewer stars. "This is London 2025, she said quietly. "The world has changed in ways you can't imagine, Brother Thomas. We've split the atom. We've walked on the moon. We've cured diseases that killed millions in your time. We've built machines that think. And 5 years ago, we finally cracked the code that let us reverse death itself, if we have enough intact DNA and the proper environmental conditions." Thomas stared at the moving pictures on the wall, his mind reeling. "Why?" The word came out harsh, almost accusatory. "Why would you do this? Why disturb the dead?" For the first time, Dr. Chen hesitated. She glanced away, and Thomas saw something flicker across her face. Guilt, perhaps, or doubt. Because we could, she said finally. Because the Resurrection Initiative is funded by people who believe death shouldn't be the end. Because there's money in immortality, even if it's someone else's immortality. And because... She met his eyes again. Because your case was special. You were executed for a crime you didn't commit. We thought you deserved a second chance. A second chance at what? At living in a world I don't understand? At being a curiosity for your scientists to study. Thomas felt anger rising in his chest, hot and familiar. It was the same anger he'd felt when the guards came for him that final time, when he realized that innocence meant nothing to men who wanted gold and power. I was a Knight Templar. I fought for the cross. I protected pilgrims on their way to Jerusalem. I took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. What purpose do I serve here? Dr. Chun was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that chilled Thomas to his newly reconstituted bones. You're not the first. We brought back 47 people over the past 3 years. Soldiers mostly, some civilians, a few historical figures we thought could handle the transition. She paused. Only 8 of them are still alive. The room seemed to grow colder. What happened to the others? Some couldn't adapt. The psychological trauma of being ripped from their own time and thrown into ours. It broke them. Some took their own lives. Others just shut down. Their bodies kept working, but their minds retreated so far inward we couldn't reach them anymore. Dr. Chen's hand tightened on her device, and a few became violent. They saw our world as corrupt, evil, deserving of punishment. We had to put them in stasis. A cage by another name, Thomas said bitterly. Yes, Dr. Chen didn't try to deny it. I'm telling you this because you deserve the truth. You'll be monitored constantly for the first 6 months. You'll undergo psychological evaluation daily. You'll live in a controlled facility until we're certain you won't harm yourself or others. And if you can't adapt... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Thomas looked again at his skeleton, at the bones that had rested in darkness for 7 centuries. He thought about the life he'd lived, the battles, the prayers, the certainty of purpose that had carried him from youth to the pyre. He thought about his brothers, the other Templars who died that day. Were they at peace? Or had they, too, been dragged back into existence by scientists playing God? There's something else you should know, Dr. Chen said, her voice dropping lower. The chamber where we found you wasn't just a tomb. There were inscriptions on the walls, symbols, warnings. She pulled up an image on her device and held it toward him. Can you read this? Thomas squinted at the symbols. They were old Templar code, the kind used for the most secret communications. His heart began to race as he translated in his mind. What lies beneath should remain beneath, he read slowly. We died to keep it sealed. Let our sacrifice stand eternal. Do not wake the guardian. Dr. Chen's face had gone pale. We found that after we'd already extracted your DNA, we didn't know what it meant. We thought it was just a religious warning, something about letting the dead rest. But Thomas... She leaned closer, and he could see genuine fear in her eyes. What were you guarding? What was in that chamber with you? And just like that, the memories came flooding back. Not the memories of his execution. Those had been at the front of his mind since he woke. No, these were older memories, buried deeper. Memories from the night before they were arrested, when Grand Master de Molay had called him and 11 other trusted knights into his private chamber. There are things the church doesn't know, de Molay had said, his face grave in the candlelight. Things we discovered in the Holy Land that would shake the foundations of Christianity itself. The kings want our wealth, but that's not what terrifies me. If they find what we've been hiding beneath the temple, if they learn what we've seen. He'd shown them then, a chamber beneath the Paris commandery, carved into bedrock that predated Rome itself. And in that chamber, behind 7 layers of blessed seals, something that should never have existed. Something that proved the world was far older and far stranger than Scripture claimed. We'll be arrested soon, de Molay had said. Philip won't stop until he's destroyed us. But we can ensure that some secrets stay buried. I need volunteers. 13 of us will go into that chamber and seal it from inside. When they execute us, they'll never find our bodies. The chamber will become our tomb, and what lies deeper will remain undisturbed. Thomas had volunteered without hesitation. They all had. They'd gone into that chamber, performed the rituals, spoken the words of binding. And when Philip's soldiers came the next morning, they found the Templars' headquarters abandoned except for the Grandmaster and a handful of others who'd stayed behind to face arrest. But they'd made a mistake. They'd assumed the seals would hold forever. They'd assumed no one would be foolish enough to break into a tomb wrapped in warnings. They'd assumed death was final. Thomas looked at Dr. Chun with new understanding. You broke the seals. We had to get to the remains. She swallowed hard. What was down there, Thomas? Below your chamber? Something your science will not understand. Something that was old when Rome was young. Thomas felt a cold dread settling into his chest. Tell me true, when you opened that chamber, did you go deeper? Dr. Chen's silence was answer enough. There were more levels, she admitted finally. Our ground-penetrating radar showed at least 3 more chambers below yours. The Resurrection Initiative Board wanted to explore them. They thought there might be more historical artifacts, more remains we could recover. They sent a team down 2 weeks ago. And they found something, some kind of vault or reliquary. The electromagnetic readings were off the charts. When they tried to open it, she pulled up another image on her device. It showed a door of dark stone covered in symbols that made Thomas's eyes hurt to look at. In the center was a handprint human-sized, surrounded by text in a language that predated any he knew. But there was something wrong with the image. It took Thomas a moment to realize what it was. The stone around the handprint was cracked, broken inward, as if someone had forced it open. Tell me they didn't, Thomas breathed. They did. 3 days ago. Dr. Chen's hand was shaking now. The team lead was a man named Dr. Vance Harding, brilliant archaeologist, but arrogant. He didn't believe in your warnings. He thought they were just medieval superstition meant to scare grave robbers. He placed his hand on that print, and the door opened. What came out? We don't know. The team's body cams cut out immediately. All we got was screaming and some kind of electromagnetic pulse that fried every piece of equipment in a half-mile radius. When the backup team went down 12 hours later, they found. She stopped, her face twisting with an emotion Thomas recognized. The look of someone who'd seen something their mind couldn't quite accept. They found the team. All 7 of them. Dead. Drained. Like husks. And the vault was empty. Thomas closed his eyes. 700 years of planning, of sacrifice, undone by modern arrogance. How long ago did this happen? 72 hours. Then there's still time. Maybe. Thomas tested his restraints again. You need to release me. Now. I can't do that. You're an unknown variable. The protocols. Your protocols mean nothing if what was in that vault is loose in your world. Thomas's voice was hard, commanding. The voice of a knight who'd led men into battle. I volunteered to be buried with it, because I was the only one who knew how to contain it if the seals ever failed. Grandmaster de Malay himself chose me. Do you understand? I'm not some random Templar you drag back from death. I am the Guardian, the last Guardian. And if you don't release me immediately, everything I died to prevent will come to pass. Dr. Chen stared at him, her analytical mind clearly warring with her training. Then she tapped her device, and the restraints around Thomas's wrists released with a soft hiss. He sat up slowly, his new body protesting every movement. Everything felt wrong, stronger somehow, but disconnected, as if he were wearing someone else's skin. He looked down at his hands and saw they were unmarked, free of the scars and calluses of a lifetime of sword work. This body was perfect, unmarked by time or toil. It made him feel like an imposter in his own flesh. What do I call you? Dr. Chin asked quietly. You're not really Brother Thomas anymore, are you? Your original body is right there. She nodded toward the skeleton in the case. Thomas stood, his legs trembling, and walked toward the display. He placed his hand against the crystal surface and looked into the empty eye sockets of his own skull. No, he said softly. Brother Thomas died 700 years ago. He kept his vows. He did his duty. He turned to face Dr. Chin. But whatever you've created, this thing wearing his face will finish what he started. What's in that vault cannot be allowed to roam free. Tell me what it is. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, trying to find words in Latin that could describe what he'd seen. Finally, he said, "In the Crusades, we found things beneath Jerusalem. Tunnels that went down into the earth, deeper than any mine. And in those tunnels, we found chambers older than human civilization. Most were empty or collapsed. But one," he paused, the memory of that day flooding back. One contained a creature preserved in something like amber, but harder, perfect, waiting. A creature? Like what? An animal? If it was ever an animal, it was from a time before the flood, before Scripture's account of creation. It looked almost human, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, eyes that were just black voids. And when we brought scholars to examine it, they went mad, started speaking in languages no one knew, languages that hurt to hear. So we sealed it away, brought it back to Paris in secret, built the chamber, set the wards. And your order fell before you could destroy it. Dr. Chin finished. We couldn't destroy it. We tried. Fire, blessed steel, holy water. Nothing even scratched that amber prison. So we did the next best thing. We buried it where no one would think to look, surrounded it with our bones and our warnings, and prayed that would be enough. Thomas looked at her steadily. Tell me true, did your Dr. Harding open the amber? Dr. Chin pulled up one more image. It showed the inside of the vault, filmed before the disaster. In the center of the circular chamber stood a column of yellow gold material, translucent, roughly 10 feet tall. And inside it, Thomas could see the dark silhouette of something that might have been human once, frozen with its arms outstretched. The log says he touched it, Dr. Chin whispered. The material reacted to his DNA. It liquefied and absorbed him in under 3 seconds. And then she pulled up the final frames, captured before the cameras died. The amber was empty. The creature was gone. And standing in its place was Dr. Harding, except his eyes were completely black, and he was smiling in a way that no human being should smile. Thomas felt his blood run cold. It's a walker, a wearer of skins. My brothers and I theorized as much, but we couldn't be certain. What does that mean? It means it's been trapped for thousands of years, maybe tens of thousands, waiting for someone foolish enough to set it free. And now, it's wearing Dr. Harding like a suit of clothes, learning how to be human again. Thomas moved toward the door. How many people live in this city? Greater London? About 14 million. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. 14 million. A number beyond anything his medieval mind had been trained to comprehend. Then we have to find it before it starts building a hive. A hive? That's what the mad scholars called it before they died. These creatures don't reproduce like animals. They convert. 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, doubling every few hours if they're not stopped. They feed on something in human consciousness, the part of us that makes us who we are. They drain it, hollow us out, and we're what's left. He looked at Dr. Chen. If it's been loose for 3 days, we may already be too late. But Dr. Chen was already moving, pulling up screens on her device, her fingers flying across the glowing surface. There have been incidents. People acting strangely, going catatonic, attacking loved ones. We thought it was a new drug hitting the streets or maybe a psychotic break phenomenon. The cases started appearing about 60 hours ago in Lambeth, near the museum facility. As of this morning, there are 417 confirmed cases across South London. 417. Thomas did the mathematics in his head, the numbers his brothers had calculated all those centuries ago. If the doubling rate held true, by tomorrow it will be thousands. By the end of the week, hundreds of thousands. Within a month, your entire species will be nothing but hollow shells for these things to wear. There has to be a way to stop it. A cure, a weapon, something. Fire, Thomas said simply. Not your modern flames. Those burn too clean. We need old fire. The kind that burns with smoke and ash, that purifies through destruction. And we need the words. What words? Thomas hesitated. He'd taken a vow never to speak them outside the chamber. But the chamber was violated. His brothers were long dead, and the vow seemed meaningless now. The binding words. The Grand Master learned them from a scroll we found beneath the Temple Mount. They weren't in Latin or Greek or Hebrew or Arabic. They were older. The scholars thought they might be from before Babel, when all humanity spoke one tongue. When we performed the ritual to seal the creature, we spoke those words. They seemed to cause it pain, to weaken its hold on our reality. Can you remember them? They're carved into my soul. I could never forget them even if I wanted to. Thomas looked at her intensely. But speaking them exacts a price. Every one of my brothers who spoke them during the sealing ritual aged years in moments. 2 of them collapsed and died before we even left the chamber. That's why we needed 13. We knew some wouldn't survive. And you're willing to pay that price again? He just came back to life. Thomas laughed, but there was no humor in it. This isn't life, Dr. Chin. This is a delay. Your science may have reconstructed my body, but my soul already moved on 7 centuries ago. Whatever you've created is just an echo, a shadow cast backward through time. If that echo can prevent these creatures from devouring your world, then it's a worthy purpose. He paused at the door. Besides, I've already died once. The second time should be easier. Dr. Chun stood still for a moment, and Thomas saw her wrestle with the decision. She was a scientist, trained to deal in facts and evidence and peer review. Everything he was telling her should sound like madness. But she'd seen the bodies. She'd seen what came out of that vault, and she'd seen 400 cases turn up in 60 hours. The facility protocols require authorization from. Protocols be damned. Thomas's voice cracked like a whip. Your Dr. Harding is out there right now touching people, draining them, building his hive. Every moment we waste talking is another soul condemned to become one of those things. Where is the nearest incident? Dr. Chen tapped her device, and a map appeared on the wall, covered in red dots that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. The densest cluster is in Southwark, about 2 miles from here, a homeless shelter. 37 people went catatonic overnight. First responders who entered the building have started showing symptoms. Then that's where it will be. They always return to feed where the prey is plentiful and vulnerable. Thomas looked down at himself. He was wearing only a thin white garment that Dr. Chen had called a medical gown. I'll need clothes, weapons, and something to start a fire. 20 minutes later, Thomas stood in what Dr. Chen called a supply room, dressed in dark clothing that felt strange against his skin. Too smooth, too perfect, without the rough comfort of wool and linen. Dr. Chun had given him boots with soles that seemed to grip the ground like glue, and a heavy coat she called a jacket that was warmer than any cloak he'd worn in his previous life. For weapons, the options were limited. Modern firearms, she'd explained, were locked behind security protocols he couldn't access. But the facility had riot gear, batons, shields, chemical sprays. Thomas took a steel baton, testing its weight. It wasn't a sword, but it would do. He also grabbed a canister of something Dr. Chin called kerosene and a simple flint lighter. This is insane, Dr. Chin said for the 3rd time, but she was already pulling on her own jacket. I should be calling security, the police, the military, and tell them what? That a medieval knight and a scientist need to fight a body-snatching demon from before recorded history. Thomas checked the lighter, watching a small flame spring to life. They'll think you're mad. By the time they believe you, it will be too late. They took what Dr. Chin called an elevator, a room that moved between floors without stairs, powered by technology Thomas didn't even try to understand. His stomach lurched as they descended, and he gripped the steel baton tighter, whispering prayers in Latin under his breath. Not because he thought God would hear him. After everything, he wasn't sure God was listening anymore, but because the familiar words steadied his mind. When they emerged into the night, Thomas stopped breathing for a moment. The world beyond the facility was overwhelming. Lights everywhere, blazing from windows and street lamps and moving vehicles, turning night into artificial day. The air smelled wrong, chemical processed, lacking the familiar sense of wood smoke and horse dung and unwashed humanity. And the noise, Dear God, the noise, a constant hum of machinery, voices, music from unseen sources, the roar of engines. Are you okay? Dr. Chen asked. Thomas forced himself to breathe. I'll adapt. I must. He looked up at the sky and felt a pang of loss. Even through the city's lights, he could see the stars were different than he remembered. 700 years of celestial drift. Which way? They walked through streets that seemed impossibly wide and clean compared to medieval Paris. Dr. Chen led him past people who barely gave them a glance, so accustomed to strangeness that a tall man in modern clothes gripping a steel baton didn't warrant attention. Thomas studied their faces as they passed. Most were absorbed in small glowing devices like Dr. Chen's, their attention entirely consumed by tiny screens. Easy prey for something that fed on consciousness. The homeless shelter was a square brick building with the words New Hope Center written above the door. Police vehicles surrounded it, their lights flashing red and blue in the darkness. Dr. Chen showed some kind of identification to an officer at the perimeter, speaking quickly in English. Thomas understood only fragments. The Latin roots of some words were familiar, but the language had evolved into something he could barely recognize. She says we're with the Resurrection Initiative medical team. Dr. Chen translated for him. They'll let us through, but they're not going in themselves. First responders who entered are in quarantine, showing signs of psychosis. Thomas nodded and pushed past the police line. The door to the shelter stood open, and beyond it was darkness. Not natural darkness, but something thicker, heavier, as if the shadows themselves had substance. Thomas felt the hair on his neck rise. He'd felt this before, 7 centuries ago, standing at the entrance to that chamber beneath Jerusalem. It's here, he whispered. They entered together. Thomas's eyes adjusted to the gloom, and he saw rows of beds lining the walls. Bodies lay in each one, perfectly still, eyes open but unseeing. As he moved closer to the nearest figure, he could see the chest rising and falling with mechanical regularity. Breathing, but nothing more. The person's eyes were fixed on the ceiling, and Thomas leaned over to look into them. They were empty, not blind, not unconscious, but utterly void of anything that could be called soul, like looking into the eyes of a corpse that someone had forgotten to close. Dear God, Dr. Chen breathed beside him. God has nothing to do with this place, Thomas said quietly. He moved deeper into the shelter, the steel baton raised, his senses alert for movement. The air felt thick here, charged with something his body recognized, even if his mind didn't understand it. It reminded him of the moments before lightning struck, when the very atmosphere seemed to hold its breath. They found Dr. Harding, or what was wearing him, in the back room, sitting calmly in a chair, surrounded by 17 more hollow shells. The body looked exactly like it had in the photographs Dr. Chen had shown him, except for the eyes. They were bottomless black pits that seemed to drink in the light. You're the guardian. The thing said in perfect Latin, its voice layered with harmonics that shouldn't come from a human throat. We remember you, you and your brothers. You sang the old words and thought you could cage us forever. Forever was ambitious, Thomas admitted, keeping his distance. Clearly, it didn't work. Nothing lasts forever. Not your seals, not your faith, not your species. The creature wearing Dr. Harding smiled, and Thomas saw that its teeth had gone black. We have been sleeping for so long, dreaming of the world as it was, when we walked freely and fed without fear. And now we wake to find a world so much richer than before. Billions of you, billions of minds to hollow, and where you've built us a paradise. We've built you nothing, Thomas said. This world belongs to them, not you. Belongs. The creature laughed, and the sound made the air vibrate painfully. You speak of ownership? We were old when your species was learning to chip stones. We were the skins of your ancestors before they had language. This world has always been ours. You were just too young to remember. Thomas felt Dr. Chen's hand on his arm, heard her whisper urgently in English. He caught enough to understand. She was asking if these were the words he'd mentioned, if he should speak the binding now. But Thomas shook his head. Not yet. Speaking the words required preparation, focus. And there was something else. Something wrong. The creature was too confident, too calm. It should be attacking, feeding, spreading. Instead it sat there, talking. As if it wanted them to. "It's a trap," Thomas said suddenly in Latin. "You're not the only one. Are you? You're just the bait." The creature's smile widened. "Clever guardian. Yes. This one," it gestured to Dr. Harding's body, "was the first. The template. But we are many now. While you've been standing here, while we've been talking, 47 new shells have been filled in this city alone. By dawn, it will be 500. By tomorrow sunset, 10,000. Your species doubles so much slower than we do." Thomas felt cold dread settle into his gut. "Then we're already too late." "Oh, yes. Hours too late. Perhaps days." The creature stood, and Thomas saw that Dr. Harding's body had changed subtly. The limbs were too long now, the joints bending at angles that were almost but not quite wrong. "But we wanted you to know, wanted you to see. You died once to seal us away. And now you've been brought back just in time to watch your sacrifice be rendered meaningless. There's a poetry to that, don't you think?" Thomas gripped the steel baton tighter. "If we're too late to stop you, then I suppose there's only one thing left to do." "Oh? And what's that, little guardian?" "Make sure you remember this world existed before you." Thomas moved with a speed that surprised even him, his new body faster and stronger than his old one had ever been. He swung the baton at the creature's skull, putting 700 years of rage and grief behind the blow. The creature caught the baton in one hand. Its fingers closed around the steel, and Thomas heard the metal creak and bend. "Did you really think?" Thomas dropped the baton and pulled the lighter from his pocket, flicking it to life with his thumb. With his other hand, he unscrewed the cap of the kerosene canister and doused himself, letting the liquid soak his clothes and skin. Dr. Chin screamed. The creature's black eyes widened. "Fire," Thomas said calmly. "You said nothing could hurt you. But fire works on anything, doesn't it? Especially old fire. Fire and flesh burning together. That's the purest purification." "You'll die," the creature said. But for the first time, Thomas heard something like fear in its voice. "I've already died once." Thomas touched the lighter's flame to his kerosene-soaked jacket. "This time you're coming with me." The fire caught instantly, racing up his clothes, and Thomas felt the pain. God, yes, he felt it. But he'd expected pain. He'd burned before. He knew this dance. He grabbed the creature wearing Dr. Harding and held on with everything he had, feeling its flesh begin to burn alongside his. The creature screamed, and it was a sound that Thomas felt in his bones, in his teeth, in the marrow of him. It tried to escape, but Thomas wrapped his arms tighter, feeling his skin blacken and peel, feeling his newly reconstructed body destroying itself for the second time in a single day. And then he began to speak the words. They came from somewhere deeper than memory, carved into whatever part of him had survived death and resurrection. The old words, the binding words, the syllables that predated human language. His lips burned as he formed them, his tongue blistering with each utterance. But he kept going. The ritual required 13 voices originally, but perhaps one voice burning bright enough could substitute for 12. The creature thrashed and wailed, trying to shed Dr. Harding's body like a snake shedding skin, but Thomas held on. Around them, the hollow shells in the beds began to stir, drawn by their master's pain. Thomas saw them rising, moving with jerky puppet motions, converging on the fire. "Dr. Chen," Thomas managed to gasp between words, his voice almost gone. "Run, now." But Dr. Chen didn't run. She grabbed the kerosene canister and began splashing its contents on the hollow shells as they approached, using Thomas's lighter to set them ablaze one by one. The room filled with smoke and screams and the smell of burning flesh. And Thomas thought dimly that this must be what hell looked like. He spoke the final word of the binding, putting everything he had left into it, and felt something break inside the creature he was holding. Not kill, these things couldn't be killed, not permanently, but cage. Bind. Force back into the in-between place where dead things were supposed to stay dead. The creature's scream became a wail, became a whisper, became nothing. Dr. Harding's body went limp in Thomas's arms, and they collapsed together into the flames. Thomas felt hands pulling him, dragging him away from the fire, heard sirens and shouts, and the rush of water as firefighters sprayed the room. Felt the pain start to fade as shock set in. His nervous system finally giving up on trying to process the damage. He looked up and saw Dr. Chen's face above him, streaked with soot and tears. "Did it work?" he managed to whisper. "I don't know. I don't know." She was pressing something against his chest, trying to stop bleeding he couldn't feel anymore. "Stay with me, Thomas. I got you back once we can do it again." But Thomas knew better. This body was done. He could feel his consciousness starting to slip away. And this time there would be no resurrection, no second chances. He'd burned through whatever miracle of science Dr. Chen's people had worked to bring him back. "Check the others," he gasped. "The shells, if they're waking up." Dr. Chen looked around the room. Through the smoke, Thomas could see the hollow shells lying still again. But now their chests weren't moving. Dead, truly dead this time. Whatever had animated them burned away. "They're gone," Dr. Chen confirmed. "All of them." "Good." Thomas felt a smile tug at his ruined lips. Then maybe we weren't too late, after all. The other incidents. The 400 cases. If killing the original stops the spread. It should, the scholar said. The hive needs the first. The template. Kill that and the rest. He coughed, tasting copper and ash. The rest should collapse. Give them time. Some might recover. Some won't. But at least they won't spread. Dr. Chen was crying openly now, still pressing bandages against wounds that were too severe to help. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry we brought you back for this." But Thomas shook his head slightly. "Don't be. I lived. I died. I live."